Welcome everybody. On behalf of Diamond Youth, I would like to welcome you all to another program with the Community Web TV. On today's program, to start off with, we're going to have Jem Errol speaking at the Kill the Bill protest. Kill the Bill is a term used to prevent protests and where the police are allowed to put restrictions into place to control these protests that are going on.
Hi everyone, I'm Jem Errol from Diamond Community Centre. Thank you for providing us a platform to speak today on a very important issue. The bill will surely set a precedent to build an authoritarian rule unless there is collective action against it. We can only change such bills and anti-democratic rules if we are on the streets making ourselves heard against those who make these rules and swaying public opinion. We must make it clear that this government is no advocate of democracy. I am from a Turkish and Kurdish community centre, and naturally we follow the political development in Turkey. We have seen government dismantle the fundamentals of democracy, and what is left unchanged. It will have no shame in attacking protesters, claiming that the police force were the ones that were attacked, not allowing vigils and using violence against women to disperse crowds, silencing and physically attacking journalists. These are the things that we have become so accustomed to seeing in Turkey. Of course, there is no democracy in Turkey, but what we have witnessed on the streets and the statements that have been made in favour of this establishment in the UK over the past few months is very similar to what we have witnessed and will continue to see so in Turkey for the past few decades. This is the reason for today. If people like us are not on the streets today, if we do not call the government to account, if we do not struggle against injustice and inequality, if we do not challenge the status quo, we will see the erosion of democracy in this country because Boris Johnson is no advocate of democracy. In fact, he finds protests and gatherings like this a nuisance to society, and if he had the public on his side, he would ban all protests. It is important to ask why the government has introduced this bill now. It is because there is more discontent against the system, the inequality between the rich and poor is growing, the pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in this system, and it is always targeting those that are the least well off. We are going to see a reoccurrence of what happened during the 2008-9 financial crash, with the worst off in society paying for the those of the rich and the 1%. The anger towards the government and its system is set to grow, and this bill criminalises those who take action against this government. Under this bill, Gandhi would be sentenced for causing annoyance with his people's position. Nelson Mandela would be charged for speaking above the decibel limit set by this bill. Those two important figures, in fact, remind us of the importance of demonstrations and popular campaigns for peace, human rights, and democracy. Without collective action, injustices would continue unchallenged, and people would lose confidence in the democratic process by which injustices are changed. You may remember this quote from Tony Benn, that there are two ways in which people are controlled. First of all, frighten people, and secondly, demoralize them. Are we frightened?
No!
Are we demoralized?
No!
It's the same each time with progress. First they ignore you, then they say you are mad, then they say you are dangerous, then there is a pause. And then you can't find anyone that disagrees with you. Think of Vietnam, think of Afghanistan, Iraq, and how public opinion changed because of collective action we took to stop government from getting away from the atrocities that they committed. The people is on the streets, it's our streets, and to stop the state building the foundations of a police state, we will continue to be on the streets for peace, for democracy, and to kill this bill. Thank you.
Yeah!
We now have a clip from Reem Kadim, who is from the Pimlico School, who has organised this protest, and we're going to see what she has to say about these protests and what's going on and how we can come together to prevent these.
So starting in September, we were introduced to a new head teacher. And with this new head teacher, we were also introduced to a bunch of new policies which were quite discriminatory towards certain groups, such as you cannot have hairstyles that obstruct people's views, which were clearly aimed to penalise those with afro haircuts. There were other policies as well, such as no facial hair, which would discriminate against Sikhs. The headscarf rule, you had to either cover all of your hair or not at all. And it's not like this protest just came out of nowhere. This was built up frustration and anger from the fact that we weren't being listened to when we did raise our concerns about this. I myself had actually approached the head teacher myself in September, and I told him these policies, especially the one about the afro, people are calling them racist. What do you have to say about this? And I was dismissed immediately. I was given a one-sentence answer before he walked away, and that was, we have more important things to talk about in 2020. Racism isn't an important thing to talk about, especially in 2020 when the Black Lives Matter protest had just passed after the murder of George Floyd. What was especially outrageous as well was the number of incidents of racism within the school itself. There was a case, for example, where a boy in the lower years had created a group chat called Black Lives Don't Matter, and he had added a bunch of students into that group. And that wasn't responded to appropriately to the boy directly or to educate the school further. Another boy had proudly stated that he was a white supremacist, and again, nothing was done about this. The fact that I had to sit in that meeting during the protests and ask them to do assemblies and PSHE lessons where they will mention racism, Black history, Islamophobia, etc. I had to sit there and ask them to give us the bare minimum. Normally, I would be outraged that we're only getting 30 minutes a week mentioning racism, but we weren't even getting that. And many have told me, oh, but we're an academy, and so they don't have to stick to the national curriculum. But isn't that more reason for you to introduce more diversity within the curriculum? You aren't confined to what the national curriculum says that you have to do, but instead we have stripped even more away from us. The curriculum that we are given does not reflect its students whatsoever. We are the ones that are being taught, and we need to feel as though we are being taught something that could actually help us, that actually reflects us. Coincidentally, the protest actually happened on the same day that the Sewell report came out, and bouncing off of what Kevin said, it actually, instead of, we don't need to be having these discussions. We don't need to be debating on whether institutional racism exists or doesn't. We know it exists, right? So them saying that, oh, it doesn't exist, they're actually trying to switch the narrative in order to not take blame or not have to face up to their mistakes. They are denying its existence. And the fact that they put people such as Tony Sewell and Black and Asian ethnic minorities to put forth this report, it's kind of like they're going, see, we're not saying it, they are. Black people are saying it, so of course it doesn't exist. To end off, the best thing for me that I feel that came out of the protest that happened on Wednesday was not the promise for the direct change that's going to happen within Pimlico, but the way that the news of it has spread so far and wide, and it could potentially inspire other students that they could stand up to what they see wrong within their own schools. I think many young people, like myself, underestimate their own power and the power that you have within numbers, especially in protest. There is power in protest, and I think Pimlico Academy showed that very well. And if you're seeing problems, minor problems and huge problems such as institutional racism, which definitely exists, my school is a prime example of it, stand up to it. You aren't too little, too small. Your voice does matter, and if they're not listening, make them listen, just like we did.
We now have an English teacher, Griffiths, who is going to be talking about the racist curriculum.
I'm really grateful to have been given the opportunity to speak at this fringe about fighting for an anti-racist education. Education has a vital role in encouraging and enforcing change, and decolonising education is not a new fight. It's not a new fight, but a long one. What is evident now more than ever is just how essential and needed it is. Decolonising education means that we must challenge colonising practices that have influenced the past and which are still present today in education. We must all recognise that in the past, education was used as a means to form false assimilation and for colonial purposes. To decolonise education, we must confront what remains of these practices in our curriculum, ensuring that we are always considering whose knowledge and ways of knowing are given a priority. We need to start questioning why Henry VIII and the French Revolution is prioritised over students learning about their history, achievements and contributions of Black people in the UK. How many students know that Black people fought for Britain in World War II? Why do we never see any Black people in any of the mainstream images of war or in any of the materials we use to teach the students about war? Why have we been erased? What message does this send to our students? Additionally, it's vital for students to understand how the legacy of the slave trade has created many of the social injustices we see today. It's unfair to constantly expose students to narrow and biased perspectives of their history. Black people do not only have a history of enslavement, but we also have a history of strength, solidarity and power. Multiple viewpoints and histories need to be taught, especially in regards to the British Empire. And people need to begin to question where the knowledge we teach our students actually comes from. Whose viewpoint does it come from? Whose ideas does it come from? Who wrote that perspective of history? And why is there so much missing and so much inaccuracy? Education is such a powerful tool that can influence young people's hearts, emotions, minds, beliefs, and that influence can last a lifetime. Therefore, we need to be mindful of what we teach. A teaching resource was suggested in the Race Commission's report, and we need to be ready to ask questions. It's our duty to teach the truth and correct misconceptions. And whilst I acknowledge the skill of Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare and would never suggest banning them, I also acknowledge that it would be helpful for students not to study the same white male voices continuously throughout their years in education. Students need to see themselves reflected in what we teach them. They need to know their voices, and voices like theirs also have made contributions to society and continues to do so. I've said this before, but whenever we talk about education failing our students, we always talk about exclusions, exams, behaviour systems, and I'm not denying that. I do strongly believe that teaching a whitewashed history is failing our students. If we continue to allow the curriculum to marginalise them and prevent them from feeling a sense of belonging, and if we continue not to confront the assumptions of white superiority that is present in our curriculum, we fail our students. A distinction needs to be drawn between diversity and decolonising. Replacing books and adding textbooks is not enough. We need to think about who the main characters in our textbooks are, who has the voice, who's presented as the villain, who's presented as a victim. Diversity includes people, whereas decolonisation re-educates them. And we need to step back and think about each text we teach and each textbook that we are allowing to be taught. I always use Crooks as an example of Mice and Men, because most people have read the text. Crooks is always presented as submissive, an oppressed Black man who suffers mercilessly, cruelly at the hands of white men and women. He's also presented to be saved by a white man who prevents him from being hung. Crooks lives in a stable with the horses and is described in a degrading manner to demonstrate the treatment of Black people during this period. If you teach your students about Crooks in that way that I've just spoken to you about him, what message will you be giving your students about Black people, about Black men, about white people, about racism and about themselves? Ultimately, we need to start decolonising rather than just recognising. We need to think about the representation of each person that is in our texts. I genuinely believe the cure for racism is education, as racism is taught. And we have the ability to help to unteach it. But ultimately, we all need to work together in solidarity to ensure that when our students leave school, they leave with a sense of belonging, and they also know that we care and they're also able to break the cycle. Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in to today's Community Web TV. If there are any recommendations, any youth-related topics, or any questions you would like to ask, please message us on Instagram at Diamond Youth. Thank you, and see you all again in 2 weeks.
Fotoğrafta gözün olmalı derler. Müzikte kulak.
On a journey in my magic new suitcase.
Burayı kesebilirsin.
You got my invitation and there's nothing more to say. Please don't you be such a drama queen. Can't you see the funny side of things? But you walk, then you stumble, then you fall, then you gotta get up
Her
again.
yer ifadeci dolu, bir şey ifade ediyor. İfade patlaması var. Otobüs durağında da bir şey ifade etmiş. Bir şey ifade etmeye çalışıyor. Giyinişiyle bunu ifade etmeye çalışıyor. Ama ifade ediyor, bir şey ifade ediyor. İfade etmek suç olmadığı için bu ciddi bir ifade var. Ona maruz kalıyorsunuz.
Getting it together and the mood is high.